Was there a time from 2023 until now where you realized this isn't going anywhere?
In the sense of not going anywhere, you mean the prosecution itself? I thought that there was a real problem with the prosecution once my client was elected president in 2024. That pretty much cinched it for me, and I figured at that point, in some form or fashion, it would go away. But to be perfectly candid, after Fonnie Willis's performance in the courtroom in early winter of 24, it was so poorly done, and the issue of disqualification was so clear, I thought it was just a matter of time until she was gone. When she was gone, I figured no one else would take this case.
I want to get back to Ms. Willis in just a second, but I do want to ask you, when this all came down, did you speak to the president? Did he say anything that was of note just about this whole process?
I'd like to recite my conversations with my client, but I'm really not permitted to do that. So let's just say that he was happy and felt it was about time.
Thank you for that. I do want to get back to District Attorney Fonnie Willis. If you could ask her a question about how she handled the case, what would you ask her?
Why she didn't take into consideration all the meritorious, substantive points that were made even before I got involved in the case, and why, while I think she always tries to exercise good judgment, it was so poorly done here with her affair with the prosecutor that she appointed to handle the case. I'd like to know how in the world she thought that would be justifiable, or did she think it was just going to remain a secret forever?
And I imagine this is not the first time you've worked with District Attorney Fonnie Willis.
No, I represented Gunna in the RICO case, in which he was permitted to enter a very, very favorable plea for resolution. So we dealt with her on that, and I dealt with her earlier than that. This was just surprisingly out of character for her.
Why so?
Because I think she has a good head on her shoulders, and I think it just somehow got displaced. I think her political ambition, her thoughts of going against a former president of the United States overrode her judgment.
Now, there's some people who look at this case now being dismissed as justice not served. Some people feel that the president and his co-defendants listed did deserve some type of punishment. What is your message to them?
This case was won on many levels. Ultimately, of course, it was dismissed by the judge upon motion of the new prosecutor. But people tended to judge this case without knowing all the evidence, without seeing any of the witnesses. And to be perfectly honest, they just don't understand that the mere fact that someone exercises their First Amendment right to speak or says something that they're in disagreement with doesn't give rise to a criminal prosecution, particularly against the former president of the United States. It's just not a situation we should find ourselves in.
Looking ahead, this case is dismissed. We do know that Georgia recently passed a law that went into effect this year, allowing defendants in certain election-related cases to recoup legal fees if the prosecutor is disqualified from the case. In this case, Fonnie Willis was disqualified. You and other attorneys said that you plan to seek those fees. Do you know how much you will be planning to seek?
Millions of dollars.
In the millions. According to campaign finance data, that lines up with how much was given, paid for through a different PAC or the clients themselves. Is there a ballpark? Are we talking 1 million? Are we talking 10 million? I know that I believe I saw a number of 2.7 from one PAC. Is there any other idea of what amount of money exactly would come from it? And do you feel that the taxpayer in Fulton County should be responsible for paying that?
Well, that's a very broad question, so I'll answer it in part. First, my expectation is that for President Trump, the amount of attorney's fees and costs could run close to $5 million. Now you have to take into account the other 15 defendants who ultimately will seek their attorney's fees as well. It would surprise me if that didn't rise $5 million or more. So you're talking $10 million? That's the answer to one part. Second part, this money that goes to attorney's fees and costs comes out of Fonnie Willis's budget. It's already been allotted. Taxpayers aren't paying anything in addition. It's unfortunate that her budget will be so affected, but she's the one that brought the case, and she's the one that has to live with the outcome.
Do you believe, some argue that the $10 million that would be coming out of her budget, potentially $10 million, we don't know what the judge will weigh in on that, to go, could be used for other resources, such as bringing those who have been waiting in jail cases and just other things that she would need? She says, I believe in another interview with the outlet Capital B, that she needs more people to process these cases. She needs more money to do that. So some see this payment could go to helping them get those different cases out of Rice Street, et cetera. What is your comment on that?
If she had exercised good judgment to begin with, we wouldn't be in this situation. She paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to her lover, Nathan Wade, somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 plus. Who knows how much from her budget she spent for other investigation, for other attorneys. All of that could be used for the very purpose that you're outlining. So her decision not to do so and to waste it on this, again, as I characterized it, political persecution, is why the money is going where it is. I would love to see her do something with her office and change some of those policies and practices so that people that are sitting in jail get reached earlier. But again, I think political ambition controlled, not common sense.
So you say it's on, if people have a question, that you're saying look at Fonnie Willis, don't look at us.
Not only am I saying that, but they re-elected her in 2024. So there's really no one to blame but themselves for putting her back in office. They could have drawn the line right there. They chose not to. But I think this boils down to you either like President Trump or you don't. And whatever the outcome is, if it's pro-Trump, pro-President Trump, you're going to like it if you're on his side. If not, you're going to be unhappy with whatever happens, for whatever the reason may be.
Thank you for your answer for that. Staying on this kind of like looking ahead, I know that you all have a time period, I believe a 45-day window to file to, and correct me if I'm wrong because you're the lawyer here, I'm just the journalist.
No, you're right,
45-day window to say that we are coming for these fees. What happens next, and when do you expect to hear from, I believe, Judge Scott McAfee, that will be making a decision on how much money will be paid from her budget?
Yeah, we have to file something in the form of a petition within 45 days. It will certainly be responded to. The only question becomes by whom. That's an open question. We don't know.
Okay.
Whether it would be the prosecutor's counsel, whether it would be the Fulton County in general, or someone from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
Okay.
We don't know. Ultimately, Judge McAfee will decide if what we are petitioning for is fees and costs, attorney's fees and costs, is reasonable, and he'll make the ultimate decision. But the statute is so new, never been used before, so there's no certainty in how it will be procedurally handled.
That's the first true test of it.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, we will certainly see. I want to just kind of get back into just a little bit of insight into the case. Is there something that the public never saw, either behind closed doors or something that you saw the writings on the walls that surprised you in your career as a defense attorney?
I'm not sure I can answer that question as framed. There are many things that the public doesn't know. That can be found in the discovery, can be found in statements that defense lawyers are aware of. Also, information through investigation that probably will never make the light of day. Surprise-wise, to be honest, no, because I've handled high-profile cases for a long time and have learned that the deeper you dig into them, the more you find out. It's not really surprising. It's just a question of getting to the bottom or trying to get to the basic fundamental facts.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is your first case with the President of the United States.
Correct.
How does him, Donald Trump, President Trump, as a client compare to, I mean, you've represented, like you said, Gunna, I believe T.I., some of the other big names here in Atlanta, as well as we were talking about before the interview, the Gold Club case. How did he compare to, or him and this case compare to your other high-profile cases?
Well, President Trump was a great client. Many people will not believe this, but he let me handle the case. He wasn't controlling. I had a contact that I used to deal with. That was his contact, also the same person that dealt with all the other lawyers. He was a great client. Basically, I didn't get any marching orders. I just got the defend me, do the best you can, let's win, which fortunately we were successful.
Do you think that the outcome of this case could set precedent for future cases like it if we see something? This was obviously a very unique case with the election. It was a RICO case, which is not the first RICO case we've seen in Atlanta, but do you think it sets precedent for anything in the future?
I would answer that by saying, I think as far as a case involving an ex-president or someone that has had high office, you have some issues now dealing with what we call sovereignty and supremacy clause. That is, can the states go after him? Can the locals go after him? Must it be limited to the feds going after him? But I doubt if we see much like this again, because I think the public may be a little tired of seeing funds that should go for better prosecutions, for taking crime off the street, being used for cases that seem to have less real value. To give you an idea, the RICO prosecution that Fonnie Willis did with YSL, which I represented Gunna, I mean, that went on forever. It cost a fortune, and ultimately it was a total waste of time. So if anything, we should learn by that and this case that sometimes lesser is better.
And part of that case even ran simultaneously with this case as well. How did you balance those two?
Well, Gunna was out of this case in December of 23 or 22. Let's see, this is December of 22. So I was out of his case.
Okay. The YSL RICO case was still going, but your portion had
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, obviously I had other cases pending, but
sure. Nothing
with Miss Willis at the time.
Got it, because I believe Gunna ended up taking a plea deal.
He took a phenomenal plea deal.
Yeah. Another case that we covered very, very closely. Is there a misconception about the case that you want to set on the record, to set straight on the record once and for all? Any misconceptions at all about the case?
I think the biggest misconception is that President Trump in some form or fashion violated the law. He did not. He was innocent from the get-go, as were the other people here. There were issues that had to deal with challenging an election and what was the appropriate way to do so, what comments could be made, what could be said as far as free speech, and all of those were ultimately misidentified as criminal in nature, when in fact it's just the exercise of one's rights under the First Amendment and a disagreement with the outcome. Whether you thought it was fair or you didn't think it was fair, there's no reason why the law doesn't allow you to challenge it. And that's what happened. But again, we go back to, if you hate President Trump, you're going to find that he did something wrong no matter what anyone says, and vice versa if you're pro-President Trump.
How important is public perception in these cases? And I ask that because in Skandalakis's conclusion, one of the lines kind of alluded to that. I cannot quote it verbatim because I don't have it in front of me, but he was in so many words saying, my job is not to please the public, my job is to be a prosecutor. Therefore, I think that this is a federal decision. But how much does public perception weigh on these cases?
Well, ultimately, it shouldn't weigh as much as it apparently does. I mean, as I've already said, Fonnie Willis's decision, I think, was based on public perception. I believe that Fonnie Willis thought that if she brought this case in Fulton County with its very strong Democratic leaning, that her chances of winning in a courtroom were good even if the facts were bad for her. And in that sense, that was wrong. You don't make decisions that way. Now, if you're asking me whether it makes a difference when I'm in a courtroom and playing to a jury on public perception, absolutely. Everyone used to ask me, how are you going to deal with this in a courtroom if you have pro Democratic, anti-President Trump jurors. I said, just the way I deal with any other issue in a courtroom. Honestly, getting down to fundamentals, but it makes a huge difference. Ultimately, it shouldn't, but it does. I think in what some prosecutors do, obviously, in my opinion, in District Attorney Willis's case, it made all the difference in the world. She was into prosecuting President Trump within a month of her taking office.
And we know that the case did not go to trial. Were you prepared to go to trial if it went that way?
I think it's probably easier to say I am always prepared to go to trial. I don't take cases to work out pleas. I think whatever reputation I have, I'm a trial lawyer. People come to me when no one else will take a case to trial. And every once in a while, you get one of those victories, cases that shouldn't be won. So yes, I was ready to take it to trial. Now there's still a lot more work to do, but everything I did in the case from day one, when I got into it in August of 23, was designed to get this case ready for trial.
What else is left to do in the case for you?
At this point, the petition for attorney's fees and probably nothing else.
Case closed for you?
When that issue is resolved.
When that issue is resolved. Last part of the interview, to be honest with you, you answered most of my questions. I'd like to leave it open-ended. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you would like for those who will watch this interview to know?
I think one thing, and one thing only, set aside what you now have as your belief as to what truth is or facts are in this case. If you're really interested, there's a lot of stuff online you can read that begins to cut against what Fonnie Willis was saying. I think the one thing that's most interesting is everyone says he must be guilting President Trump because of his phone call to Secretary of State Raffensperger. Go back and read what he says and see whether or not, from a First Amendment standpoint, he had the right to say it, as opposed to whether or not he was suggesting someone commit a crime.
Mr. Sadow, thank you so much for coming down. We truly appreciate your time.
Again, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.